Hello, and welcome to She Leads Biotech, the podcast that celebrates women leaders in the bioscience space. I'm your host, Sharron Cox, CEO and Managing Director of CNA International, based right here in New York. And each week I'll be talking to women leaders about their work, their triumphs and challenges, providing invaluable insight into how women can unlock their superpowers and succeed on their own terms. So whether you're navigating your own career path in bioscience or you're passionate about science and innovation, I hope you're empowered and inspired by each episode.
My guest today started her career in a blood bank, packing blood for delivery to patients. She's been involved in regulatory affairs and quality assurance, and now as Chief Operating Officer of BBG Advanced Therapies, a newly formed subsidiary of BioBridge Global, she's leading efforts to streamline advanced therapies for clients. So please join me in welcoming Adrienne Mendoza. Adrienne, hello. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Thank you for having me, Sharron.
Oh, absolute pleasure. And we're like twinsies today.
We got the blue crew today.
Yeah, and didn't even coordinate that together beforehand. So, well, listen, it's great to talk to you. I really appreciate you taking the time out. Now you're over in Texas, aren't you?
Yes, out of San Antonio, Texas. So Central South Texas area. It's great weather. Always welcome any visitor.
Now, anybody who listens to the show regularly, I have a thing about the weather because I'm British, so we have to talk about the weather. And I know that San Antonio is away from Dallas, but I do just have to say, when I was in Dallas for Advanced Therapies Week, what was that? Freezing. Freezing.
Yes, it was really bitterly cold. It actually was colder that period of time in San Antonio than it was in Dallas. It was just an unusual cold snap that kind of left cold air hovering down here in this area, but it was pretty cold in Dallas. It was even colder in San Antonio at that time.
Oh, it was, I can't believe, because you was like, oh no, I'm further south, so it won't be as cold. It's just obviously, as you say, a cold snap just hangs over. But oh my goodness, I was glad that I was dressed accordingly because of how cold it was in New York at the time. I didn't have to change, but glad I didn't take my flip-flops. That's all I can say. So, and touching on Advanced Therapies Week, I can't believe we didn't get a chance to meet up. What happened?
I agree.
We must have been like ships in the night.
We were ships in the night. I went to a couple of talks, but I was mostly hovering around our booth. We were launching our brand, BBG Advanced Therapies. So I had a couple of different interviews and whatnot, but I guess we passed like ships in the night. And I'm sorry I didn't get the chance to see you. I know we wanted to meet up, but I'm glad we are today.
Absolutely. And there will always be another time. So I will venture over to the great state of Texas. I'll make my way over and you'll know where to find me if you hit New York.
Yes, for sure.
Well, listen, let's talk about you and your journey. I know that you are the COO at BioBridge, and they oversee blood banks and tissue banks. Is that correct?
Correct. We have, so BioBridge Global is an organization that's comprised of 4 subsidiaries. And it is, as BioBridge Global, all of those different subsidiaries take advantage of centralized functions. So human resources, ITS, the functions of legal, the legal teams, finance, those are centralized to BioBridge Global. But within BioBridge Global, we have separate divisions which operate to focus on different areas of the work we do. But we have a single mission, and the mission is to save and enhance lives through the healing power of human cells and tissue. So each of the subsidiaries takes part in that mission in a different way, and I run one of the subsidiaries.
Excellent. Well, I want to talk about the subsidiary that you run and learn more about that. But first of all, tell me your journey. How did you find yourself in the world of blood and cells and tissue and all of those wonderful things?
Well, it's as a lot of journeys, a winding road for sure. But I actually started out working in a blood bank, and I was entry level. I just packed up the blood, sent it to the hospitals, took the orders over the phone from the laboratories about patients. So I started in blood banking, and I spent about 15 years of my early career in blood banking, but in a capacity of regulatory affairs eventually and quality assurance. actually focusing on process improvement. So I kind of got a chance to look at systemic issues that we had within the blood bank and solve for those issues over time. That was actually at the American Red Cross Blood Services. So they had a large portion of the demand from the blood supplies or requirements in the US that we would support. I ended up moving in. I was very intrigued by the world of cell therapy. My mom passed away when I was 9 years old of ovarian cancer. She was just 40 years old. And at the time, treatments are as they are in much of the case today: chemotherapy, radiation, surgery. And those options, even 20 years ago, we were excited about the opportunity that cell therapies had to potentially find ways to move past those traditional treatments and into something new. So I actually was drawn to the field of cell therapy for that idea of working on solutions that could eventually create alternative treatment options and maybe curative therapies.
Yeah.
And so I worked for an umbilical cord blood bank in California that had presence in Taiwan and India named StemSite. Great experience. I was again, over regulatory affairs and quality assurance. And we got a chance to lobby for funding mechanisms in California. So I had a chance to do some of the more, in a way, regulatory affairs to legislate new mechanisms of funding for this field. Great experience there in terms of developing facilities as well to support the processing of cord blood and storage. Then I moved into the pharmaceutical arena, realizing that I needed to learn more about the quality management systems in pharmaceuticals. And I wanted to bring back that knowledge to this industry because I saw that the US FDA was expecting a different standard than blood banking to be applied towards cell therapy. So I felt it was important advancement in my knowledge to go to pharmaceuticals. And I did so for about 3 years. I worked for a company that manufactured peptides and oligonucleotides, which are the active ingredient for a lot of drug products. And it was great because it was a contract manufacturer. And so I had that exposure to the big pharma, organizations and what they were expecting. And but I really was drawn again back to the work we could do in cell therapies and in regenerative medicine, and even to blood banking, because you can feel that connection between the donor, the community, and patients you're supporting. So I found this role at BioBridge Global, which was actually their head of quality and regulatory affairs. And I moved to Texas. I was living in California, and like many Californians, I moved to Texas about 9 years ago. And it's been great. I have really enjoyed working here. And I believe what we do is transforming medicine and in helping our partners achieve these new therapies and bring them to market.
And I know that your career has grown in the roles that you've taken, and the various duties that you've undertaken, which I guess has really been a learning ground for you to be able to be an effective chief operating officer. What was that journey like?
That's a great question. I had the opportunity to study under a chief operating officer who had a lot of experience within the blood bank part of our enterprise. Elizabeth Waldman was the chief operating officer when I took on her role when she retired out. We had a chance to overlap for a year and a half, and I was coming in from the quality and regulatory affairs world. I really hadn't, getting wherewithal about financial sheets and, what we needed to do to control expenses and the operating mechanisms. Those things I was familiar with, but hands-on practice with those, it was very minimal in the quality and regulatory world because we just had to adopt a budget that was given to us and manage our expenses. But this was, developing that budget, figuring out what we needed to do for CapEx and OpEx expenses, and navigate the operations itself and sales. That's also something very new and different that I learned in that time frame working with Elizabeth before she retired. So I was grateful for that overlap. A lot of people have challenges, I know, with outgoing and then they're incoming, but it was a great opportunity for me. And so that, I remember even prior to that, I had a great mentor, and the person I reported to when I was in my quality role was our chief compliance officer and general counsel, Richie Wyatt. And he sat down with me one day and asked me, Adrienne, well, what do you want to do? And I was still in my quality role. What do you want to do when, you could go into your next chapter, quote unquote, when you're all grown up? And he tells the story better than I do. But, I had I remember that moment in time thinking the answer I give to this gentleman who's really my advocate, my mentor, and he's a champion for me, the answer I give is definitely going to be an answer that's going to change the trajectory of my career. I loved quality and regulatory, but I really wanted to be able to make a hands-on difference, and I felt I could do so even more directly in operations. And I told him that, I said, I think chief operating officer is probably my next role, which then he would need to find a different successor than me, at that time, because I think he was asking me that question. But he really was instrumental in me moving into that opportunity when it came along. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's obviously one of the topics of the show, and something that we've talked about a lot is how has that transition been going into the C-suite from somewhere within a company. But it sounds like you had amazing support, and sounds like the company was already very female friendly, shall we say, for want of a better word. How was that transition in for you?
Yeah, well, because I had that great support, and we have a process which is, I think, very unique. Our chief executive officer, CEO of BioBridge Global, Marty Landon, was, when he came in about same time as I joined 9 years ago, he brought in with him a process called leadership organizational readiness, and so we actually had very open dialogue within the senior leadership team about high performing individuals within the organization that likely could ascend to greater responsibilities. And we also had open conversations about people who, struggled to move to the next levels. And so you have this environment where people are really looking at the organization not as just an operation, but rather as a development tool for people. And where will people navigate into their career next? So I think that in itself was a big differentiator, because this conversation around who would be the successor for Elizabeth, the outgoing COO for that part of the organization, and other members who were going to retire out at some time or who planned to move on to something else in their career, there was an active dialogue. And so the transition was with a lot of support, because everyone was aware we as an organization thrive when our people develop with the support around them, and we embrace the next challenge that they'll face in their career to help ready them for even the greater challenges to come. So I had really the support of everyone within the corporate officers group, the senior leadership team, because we had all these active dialogue, and I could reach out to them without being ashamed, asking for help. I spent a lot of time with our finance team understanding things that I hadn't had a lot of exposure to.
Yeah. And you were already within the organization, so that was a natural and a comfortable conversation and comfortable transition through. Have you ever been in a situation where you've gone into that type of role from outside of a company? How has that been as an introduction, if it's happened?
Yes, I did. I remember the transition that I made from blood banking into cell therapy was more difficult. Even though I was coming into a similar capacity, it was in terms of being in regulatory and quality assurance, I was suddenly now leading a group of people, a team. And so it was my first experience being a manager and leading a team of people and not just being the individual contributor. And I think the struggle I had was I tend to be I love the hands-on effort, and I like the feeling of accomplishment when I complete something. So I had a ton of challenges, I think, letting go of doing the things myself and having the team do that. And also the change management sort of principles of bringing people along, because there were things that I really wanted us to do differently and needed us to do differently. And so having to find a way to motivate the team and inspire them. And not only that, but I think the greater difficulty at the time was managing up. I needed to get buy-in from the people who I was now reporting to and who worked within the senior leadership team at that organization. And I had to create a new set of skills. How do I show the value proposition? How do I identify how we need to operate and compare it to, where we are today? How do I explain what we need and really help people come along and buy into those ideas? So that took me a while to feel comfortable. And there was definitely tension for a while, because I felt like I wasn't being able to move fast enough on some of the changes that I expected to make. But I think those learning opportunities are really what is about growth in the end. You get through those challenges and you realize, okay, I had to navigate 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, for a while. And then you realize there's another way to handle those kinds of scenarios. And that's what accelerates your career from then on. Yeah.
And how did you navigate it? Were there people around to show you the way, or was it kind of mess that one up? Okay, let's just try this path and see what happens there.
It was a little of both. This, I think, I had this, I had there were some strong personalities, around me at that time, and they were good. It was good that they were strong personalities because we had differing views and different opinions. And I would say that there were many times that I had to revisit my approach with some of those stronger personalities, and there was a time actually that I ended up in like a little bit of an accident where I broke my leg, not a car accident, but just, a life accident. Broke my leg.
You
I
have
was
clumsy, Adrienne.
clumsy. I was clumsy. I fell into like a garage. Yeah. So during the time that I was out, on like a medical leave, I remember being panic struck that I would actually have to return one day to work because we had a number of disagreements at that point with about something. I can't even remember. Looking back, I don't even remember what the topic was, but there was a disagreement going on.
And it was important at the time.
It's important. So I went out on medical leave, and during that time, I remember thinking, I just got to find a way out. Like, this is my time. I can look for a job and find another way. Then I realized, oh, I can't do that. My medical coverage. So I remember thinking, oh, I have to go back into the workplace that I had held all this tension. And I decided, I don't know what came over me, but I think I decided to just approach it with completely differently. I was letting other people's emotion. I was mirroring their emotion. So when the tension rose, my tension rose, before I went out on this medical leave. And when I came back to work, back to the office, I made an intentional decision to not let people get to me, basically to not exhibit the behavior I was seeing from them back. And it was a huge transformation because, and later I learned in my career, like I went to some executive education courses that talked about communication, and mirrored communication is that, you can actually help people, bring people along to how you need them to respond by changing your own tone. And I really realized that without having gone through that course yet later on, but I lived it out in terms of coming back to an environment, and my interaction changed, and I was much more effective because I wasn't letting those behaviors drive my own behavior. I was allowing myself to stay steady and just push through those conversations and conflicts without any conflict at all in my, the way I was presenting, and it was successful. And that has been a key thing. I've had to revisit it a couple times, remind myself that that's a skill, and it's something that's sometimes hard to manage, but it is very much a big contributor to moving forward.
So it was actually pretty good that you had that medical time out to give you
Mhm.
that time to think through, because otherwise the danger is that it would have blown to a point
Oh yeah.
of no return, right? At some point.
It was at that point, yes, for sure. I think probably my head was somewhere else, probably on the events when I fell into that gopher hole and have, broke my leg. But it needed to happen.
Yes, bless you. So, okay, so let's talk about your division of BioBridge. What is that all about?
Oh, great. Okay. So the division I run is called BBG Advanced Therapies. BBG is short for BioBridge Global. And the advanced therapies arena, I think many of your viewers probably know this, but it's the cell and gene therapy arena of how we're advancing these new therapies to market. And we had already had a number of our subsidiaries had overlap into the functions supporting advanced therapies, whether it be the testing. So that was being carried out in Qualtech's laboratory, the cell therapy testing and analytical development. South Texas Blood and Tissue, which is the subsidiary I oversaw before, was supporting the donor recruitment of people who would provide those cells as starting materials. So whether cord blood banking, umbilical cord blood banking, or peripheral stem cell collection. and mesenchymal stromal cells. These were all collected, and the donors were recruited, and also patients leukapheresed. And so the cells were collected from patients within South Texas Blood and Tissue. And then we had GenCure, which was the previous subsidiary to BBG Advanced Therapies, which focused on biomanufacturing. So you have these different pockets within the organization that all focused on different elements: testing, source materials or starting materials, and manufacturing. We decided it was best to bring those different skill sets into one cohesively operating unit and simplify it for our clients that would often have to go to different parts of our enterprise, and simplify it for our team as well. So we created BBG Advanced Therapies. We sunsetted the GenCure brand, which was focused on just biomanufacturing, and we brought in those functions of testing and starting materials. We think that this is a very important need in the industry, to have an organization such as ours where a client can go to and it's fully integrated. You can have starting materials collected, you can get those processes and analytical methods developed, and you can carry out the manufacturing and testing and all the logistical support downstream, all in one organization where we have no need to outsource those functions. It's very exciting to me because it's a way that I can get back into what I'm very passionate about, which is helping to develop these next generation therapies and bring about a way for patients to access them more readily, and for our community to participate in getting access to these therapies more quickly as well. So
Your view on the cell and gene therapy future, or I mean, let's not go too far in the future. Let's settle on 2025. I know when we were all in Dallas, that there was a lot of positivity, bullishness. I think people were saying that they were feeling very bullish about the coming year. Can you speak to how people are feeling about it now?
there is some concern, especially with regard to fundraising for those early phase or preclinical startup organizations, with regard to the uncertainty that we started off this year with on funding, particularly NIH funding and grant funding that comes in to support and drive health equity initiatives, and to bring about just that early, much needed capital for companies to get a start. And a lot of the changes that occurred early on in this year brought about some uncertainty and heaviness in terms of the confidence that the field would have the necessary energy to advance things that are in early development today that show a lot of promise. I think there's still some hesitation. I know in the last few weeks we've seen some clarity come about, and maybe some additional changes that have lifted some of that concern away. Still is a concern that funding is going to be a challenge. It has been a challenge for early biotechs for the last few years, especially as there's big mega rounds of funding going to like really late stage companies and consolidated interests. So it's hard. It's a hard road to navigate for early stage biotech companies. We can be a solution provider for those groups, because we can think creatively, find ways to navigate that early stage, try to minimize the costs upfront, and get them through so they can get to their funding rounds, maybe from more private equity sources too.
I think that is the thing for the early stage companies. That's very much was where my market was a couple of years ago. And I've seen firsthand, really the struggles that they've had. And I just think the flexibility of suppliers, vendors, that it's kind of we're all in it together to come out the other side, because it will come out the other side. And I think the potential for cell and gene therapy astounds me. So much of what's factual and happening now, not that long ago, was the topic of Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, or crazy things like that. And it's like, oh yeah, that's never going to happen, but it has, and it does, and it's there's so much potential there. I've seen comments on LinkedIn over recent weeks of companies that are at later stage and they've done well, who are looking to how can we step in to help those smaller emerging companies. And I think that it's that community within the advanced therapies community is That's what I've seen since working in it, that it is a community that's ready to step in and help each other out.
I agree. And that's the beauty of this. It's a field that is nascent enough and people are aware of the challenges they face. They've lived it themselves often by the time they get to those stages, and they know that it's not easy and we all benefit from each other's success. That is just the nature of new drugs.
Yep.
When we see the success of others, it benefits our own road to that success. And so I do think that there is so much incredibly promising data coming out, regulatory paths, which are getting clearer with Mesoblast's approval on the MSC therapies for graft versus host disease. That created a lot of regulatory certainty when it comes to those MSC-based therapies, which have had some challenges getting approved before. And, iPSCs, the advancements we're seeing there and some of the data coming out that maybe show more promising safety and toxicity detail. And then when we see about the CAR T therapies, which have become commercialized and now going to earlier stages of therapeutic potential, plus the TIL therapy that got approved late in 2024, metastatic melanoma, it is a very exciting time where a lot of data is coming around to the table. Regulatory paths are becoming more certain. It's really the funding challenges that are the only thing. If that's resolved in the coming years and months, hopefully, and the funnel of cash flow begins to get some more clarity around it, the potential for this year and the next following years to be incredibly exciting and show that these therapies can replace the mainstay drugs today. Like I go back to my mom's treatment, surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation. And we are on the cusp of, as an industry, changing that paradigm. We just have to be aggressive towards advancing this field and getting it to more patients and making sure that we equip those scientists and developers and the pharmaceutical companies with what they need to get there.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, and I've shared this with other guests, I have a massive cancer phobia. Literally, I get an itch on my nose and I've got cancer of something. And for me, ovarian cancer was always, because growing up, and it was the silent killer, and I was just obsessed. And then a very, very good friend of mine in the UK, once I'd moved here, she contacted me. It was just as COVID was starting, and she had been diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. And I just thought, well, oh my God, my friend's going to die. But yes, she had to do the chemo and she had tumors on her kidneys, but came through that all. And she's now doing certain immunology areas that are, and every 6 months when she goes, she's clear and is now in year 4, coming into year 5 of, please God, all continuing to be well. But that was once, it wasn't that long ago that it was considered, well, there's really nothing that can be done. And for somebody like a cancer phobe like me, every time I see and hear great things that are going on, it just calms me just that little bit more. So it's amazing. And I really hope that funding comes through so that the real patients get that chance at life going forward.
So glad she was able to get access to, these therapies that are really transforming her outcome. It's awesome. Yeah. And that just kind of reminded me of one of the challenges we face and what we're trying to help overcome is that very thing, patient access. It is a big challenge for this field because entirely new ways to deliver these therapies, which often start with the patient's own cells, and the availability of where those can be collected or where the cells can be administered once the therapy is produced. That is a very narrow channel in which to funnel a great many people who actually qualify for these therapies, especially if you're between providers hesitant because they don't know the therapies out there or know whether or not these outcomes are, qualified, or just the access to the infrastructure. There are big constraints there. And we as an organization have been working to solve some of those. We have a really exciting announcement coming up in late March, early April around a mobile leukapheresis bus, which is allow us to go to places where the cells can't be collected today, but can be later. And that could help us to overcome some of the challenges, not all of them, but we're going to do our part.
Maybe this episode will air after you've already made the announcement. So that will be cool. So one of the first things that how I first heard about you was through your newsletter. And it came across my feed and I subscribed and it's great. I love it. It's teaching me so much. What inspired you to do that?
Thank you, by the way, for being a subscriber. So my the newsletter that I created, I was inspired to a couple things. It's called, if anyone's interested, Blueprints for Breakthrough or Blueprint for Breakthroughs. And I felt there was a need to bring together thoughts on not just what are the challenges this field faces, but what are the potential solutions, whether driven by disruptive innovations which have happened outside this field, even in other industries, even separate from healthcare, but they addressed similar challenges on scaling, manufacturing, logistics, whatever they may be. Identify what could be those design elements of the future of these therapies getting access to patients and access to the infrastructure needs. What are those potential solutions? Because I have seen that we tend to be, as an industry, very good at identifying those things that we need to work on. But the solutions are often hard to find. So I wanted to create an article which would give me a chance to actually do a lot of that research myself, help discover what potential solutions could be out there, invite others to collaborate on those potential solutions, and then provide a forum to people to discuss those and to also learn about them. And it also gave me the opportunity to, like I said, research that myself. I'm still kind of coming back into this field. I've got a great team of experts and technical wizards around me that are, fortunately part of this team. But I feel like it's an opportunity for me to study the various situations and challenges that the industry faces so that I can better understand them and apply, our solutions to those challenges. And then, for awareness, I know that we have a brand new brand. BBG Advanced Therapies had not existed in terms of its name, but it's a function of what we've been doing for 50 years. And I wanted to make sure I was able to tell the story of who we are as BBG Advanced Therapies, introduce myself back into this field from some time away, into the pharmaceutical arena and kind of behind the curtain in quality and regulatory affairs. Yeah, so that's the real reason why I love it. And I've been impressed with how quickly it has taken off. I very, not only impressed, but actually quite humbled because I didn't realize how quickly people would find it valuable. There's about 800 subscribers to date, and I think, it's been great to see the kinds of people who are subscribing and interacting and wanting to reach out and ask if they can collaborate on an article. And it's deeply humbling. And I'm so glad that I started doing that because it's bringing people together.
And have you thought of turning that into a community of those subscribers and them becoming part and getting those kind of conversations going in a forum of some sort?
I think it's a great question. Originally, my thinking was having people communicate and be part of that community in the comments of the article, have a almost referenceable resource of exchange of ideas. And there hasn't been as many comments on a lot of those articles as I expected. So I do think, long term, it would be great to bring together those who have been interested in collaborating on these different articles at different forums and industry events, get people together, invite them to a panel session or even just a roundtable discussion, even if it's very informal, to talk through some of those solutions, bring up other ideas, highlight things that they think should be featured in future editions. And I think that would be a great have those like-minded people who just want to solve these problems and see the industry grow and advance come together as one.
And they all love to keep talking about it as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
any thoughts of turning it into a podcast?
Oh, I would love that. Yes. I started doing like a little bit of a podcast style thing to feature different case studies our organization's been involved in. But I think that that's a great idea, is talking about like the industry itself, just bigger than that. Like, what are the challenges we face and what are the solutions? I'd love it. And I probably need help figuring out how to do that because you've got this down, Sharron.
I'm an expert. I've been doing it for 8 months, so I know everything. But I just think, with the subscribers that you've got to the newsletter, if you look at, just a few of those that would potentially want to go on and be guests, and then you've got all sorts of conversations taking place that almost brings the newsletter to life.
That's a great idea.
I definitely recommend it. I'm looking to do the other way around. I went the podcast route first, mainly because it's easier for me to make up stuff in my head and be chatting than to actually have to formulate something that I'm not an expert in. I know nothing. I love these shows because I get schooled, and each time I learn something new about an industry that I'm fascinated in, but I'm certainly not an expert in it. So to do a newsletter was challenging because it was like, well, I don't know. So it would be a newsletter just about recruitment. And I thought, well, I don't really want to do that. So I went down the podcast route first and foremost. And like yourself, I really have been humbled by the reception that it's had, and more people are reaching out to me saying, we'd love to be part of it, or I know somebody who could add value to this. And we've got, guests lined up for months for something that I thought was going to be 10 episodes and done. I'm like, okay, well, let's keep this going.
Its own thing. It's taken on its own life.
Life of its own.
I love it.
If you choose to go down the podcast route, I'll be more than happy to have a conversation with you on how we've done it. And it's not that difficult.
That was
So
very helpful.
we've kind of identified the future for you. You're busy. You've got a task on your hand with getting the BBG up and going and making it a huge success, which I know you will. What's your advice to aspiring leaders, and certainly people who are looking at the cell and gene therapy, looking at advanced therapies and thinking, is there a future in there for me? What would you say to them?
Well, I think, one thing I would say might be a little bit cliche, which is that you should always follow your passions in your heart. That's first and foremost in my mind, because you can't bring the other parts together, and unless you have that drive and passion for what it is you're doing. So if this is a field which you believe has the opportunity to save your loved ones in the future, to make a difference for the world and bring about a transformative medicines, which is, we can get really geeky and sciencey here, and a lot of people are very into that, but some people their contribution to things might not be in this field. So I think you have to be first and foremost interested in that kind of thing. Secondly, you will experience times you're not ready for something, and it's okay. You can take on something. The main thing is your willingness to put yourself into a process of learning and understanding and asking questions and asking for help and finding a resource where you might, not otherwise have had the knowledge and the skill set to move to that next chapter. It's okay to not know what to do at first, as it's definitely extremely important to ask for help from those around you and to seek out people who you admire and who might become a resource for you to help you. That is, I think, the only really way you can advance. I think I see people stop in their careers when they are not ready to take on another challenge and learn more. That's when they sort of settle into their role and they become in a fixed position. And that's fine for some people. I think if you're ambitious and you want to really make a big difference in the world, you're going to have to push yourself forward so that you can be part of that leading edge that moves something forward and develops those solutions when others haven't. It takes people who are willing to put themselves out there, put themselves at risk and learn, potentially fail, to learn again. And that's what moves the needle. I mean, whether it's a personal needle on your career or it's the industry's needle on advancement, it takes that kind of attitude towards it.
And maybe to seek out that mentor that just gives you that nudge when you're feeling unsure and helps to kind of push you along. Because sometimes we need that, right? We need somebody to just give us that kind of push into the next phase when we don't think we can necessarily get there.
Yeah, if you have people around you that have said to you, you know what, I think you can do anything you set your mind to, and I'll support you in that. Keep those people around. They're very important to your well-being, your career, your future, and they'll always lift you up. So yeah, I'm very grateful for those who've been able to do that for me. And without them, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to, nor would I have taken on those opportunities when they came.
Well, great piece of advice to those in the next generation coming through. Thank you so much, Adrienne. I'm just so pleased that we've actually had the opportunity to spend some time together. I'm sorry it wasn't in person. I was looking forward to that cocktail that we were hoping to have, but I'm sure there'll be other events that we'll meet up at. And thank you for your time today. It's been great talking to you. I wish BBG every success and look forward to following your own personal success further as we go along, and keeping an eye on that newsletter and maybe seeing that transition into a podcast.
Yes. Well, thank you, Sharron. I have been very impressed with all the work you're doing to bring about career development advice and opportunities for people to go into new roles. It's a great thing you're doing. Thank you for inviting me on the podcast, and I'll definitely take you up on the offer for assistance. I think it's a great idea to turn a Blueprint for Breakthroughs into a podcast. I think it'd be an amazing opportunity to continue the dialogue and make it even more. Yeah.
You've already got the name. You haven't got to think up a name. So it's all there. So it'll be fantastic. And I would be more than happy to be any part of it that I could. But it's been an absolute pleasure. Have a fabulous weekend, and we will meet again.
You too. Thank you, Sharron. Bye.
Well, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. She Leads Biotech is brought to you by CNA International USA, a woman-owned boutique search firm based in New York. If you're looking to hire talent for your company or want support in achieving your career goals, please reach out to me at contact@cnaint.com. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. And remember, the success of every woman should be an inspiration to another. So don't be afraid to share yours. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.